Now, these aren't just killers, and they are people who wanted to leave their mark in ways that are hard to fathom. Whether out of obsession, revenge, or just because they felt like it. The individuals you're about to hear about left behind crime scenes that aren't typical for true crime tales. Now, these ones are beyond unsettling. But welcome to Scary Mysteries, and buckle up. Here are 5 very disturbing murder cases. Number 5. Ultimate Revenge. On the surface, Daniel Kovarbizic seemed like any other suburban teenager. He had a girlfriend, a job doing odd chores, and the kind of restless energy most 16-year-olds carry. But underneath the easy smiles and normalcy was a secret that had been festering for 2 long years, one that couldn't be hidden forever, and it was about to explode into a crime so brutal it shocked everybody in North Ridgeville, Ohio to their core. On January 22nd of 2010, Daniel showed up at his neighbor's house like he had many times before. Dwayne Hurley, a 55-year-old man who lived just minutes away, had become a strange figure in Daniel's life, in part benefactor, but also part predator. It all started out innocently enough. Hurley paid Daniel $30 to watch his dog for 10 minutes. And soon after, it was come by and do some yard work, then more visits. Hurley gave Daniel gifts and let him drive his prize Corvette. He took him shopping and bought him a pocket knife. But what seemed like kindness quickly turned into control. According to Daniel, Hurley began demanding more, like touching skin to skin in exchange for money. And it was all masked by the illusion of a caring friendship. And for 2 years, Daniel said nothing. He just went along with it. There was shame and fear involved, and the overwhelming belief that no one would understand even if he said anything. On the 1-year anniversary of his relationship with his girlfriend, Daniel had come up with a romantic plan. He wanted to spell out "I love you" in the snow outside her house with roses and buy her dinner. To do this, he needed about $80 to make it happen. So tried and true, he asked Hurley for the money, who said he would give it to him, but only if Daniel were willing to do something for him. And in that moment, something inside the young man snapped. He grabbed a pickle jar from Hurley's kitchen and smashed it against the back of his head. And Hurley staggered, but stayed standing. And Daniel then pulled out the pocket knife Hurley had once gifted him, twisting the weapon of manipulation into one of revenge. He then stabbed Hurley twice in the head before the blade snapped off. Panicking, Daniel ran to the kitchen because he had to finish what he started. He grabbed another knife and began stabbing again and again. When it was over, Hurley had been struck 55 times. Blood covered Daniel's clothes and hands. He called his father, who rushed over and drove him to St. John Medical Center. And there, Daniel admitted everything, and his father called the police.
Meantime, the trial today for a local teenager charged with murder. 16-year-old North Ridgeville teenager Daniel Kovarbizic will be tried as an adult. He's charged with killing a family friend, 55-year-old Dwayne Hurley, last January.
During the trial, Daniel testified about the years of abuse, and he described the manipulation, the fear, and the humiliation that kept him silent. When it was all said and done, Judge James Burge made a surprising move, and he found Daniel guilty of voluntary manslaughter and aggravated assault, not murder. And Daniel was then sentenced to 5 years probation and ordered to a juvenile rehabilitation center. But there was a problem. No facility would take him. The violence of the crime made placement nearly impossible, and so for months, Daniel sat in county jail waiting for a bed to open up somewhere. While still in custody, Daniel was charged with threatening to stab a guard at the county jail, and suddenly people wonder if he truly was just a victim in all this. And really, was his story about years of abuse even verifiable? North Ridgeville police said that despite a deep investigation, they couldn't find any other reports of inappropriate behavior by Dwayne Hurley. No prior allegations, no hidden accusations, no witnesses to back up Daniel's claims. The only evidence of abuse came from Daniel telling police about it. Or was he telling the whole truth, that this was a warranted act of revenge in his eyes? Or was it a clever cover-up story? Perhaps a mix of both.
You know, all this stuff's gonna cost about what? And I'm like, $80. So, you know, he's like, you know, this stuff isn't free, right? And I look at him and I see him looking at me, and then that's when I just snapped.
Today, Daniel's case remains one of those rare, deeply unsettling ones where victim and perpetrator become impossible to separate, and where the price of silence is paid in blood. Number 4. The hunt for Farian Wardrip. Between 1984 and 86, a terror quietly bloomed across North Texas. A predator who didn't just stalk his victims, he studied them, waiting for the right moment to strike. His name was Farian Wardrip, and for 2 years, he was every young woman's worst nightmare. Wardrip was an imposing figure, standing 6'6" and weighing in at around 220 pounds, so pretty easily he could take control of any woman he wanted. He wasn't a drifter or truck-driving killer. He spent his days working as a hospital janitor, and there he got to see many ladies come and go, and some of them he became fascinated with. On December 21st of '84 in Wichita Falls, Texas, Terry Sims, 20-year-old student and part-time EKG specialist, thought she was just spending the night at a friend's apartment. That evening, Wardrip had been lurking outside, peeping in through the windows. As Sims heard him at one point, cracked open the door to see what was going on, and that's all it took. When she fled back inside, Wardrip simply kicked down the door. He overpowered her tiny frame, binding her with an electrical cord before assaulting and then stabbing her to death. And Terry fought hard, but it wasn't enough against a man twice her size. When her friend returned hours later, she found the poor girl lying in a pool of blood on the bathroom floor. Police preserved DNA and a fingerprint from the crime scene, but with no suspect, the case went cold, and Wardrip vanished into the night. And just weeks later, on January 19th, another young woman would cross his path, and Tony Gibbs, 23-year-old registered nurse, and barely over 5 feet tall, weighing just 94 pounds. And Gibbs offered a familiar co-worker, Wardrip, a ride early one morning after a night shift, and that was a fatal mistake. Instead of letting her drop him off, the man forced her down an isolated dirt road. In the middle of nowhere, near an abandoned school bus, he assaulted her, stabbed her 8 times, and left her to die. And Tony incredibly survived the initial attack, and she got out of the car and managed to crawl over 100 feet towards the road looking for help before succumbing to her injuries in a desolate field. And her body was found weeks later. Her abandoned car was discovered just days later, parked near Wardrip's own apartment. Yet again, the big man escaped suspicion. March 24th of '85 in Fort Worth, a new city, but the same nightmare. And Wardrip met 25-year-old Deborah Taylor at a bar where her husband had left earlier that night because they had a fight. He offered her a ride home, which she accepted, and when she rejected his advances, he snapped. Her body was later found dumped at a construction site, and for years police suspected her husband, despite him passing multiple polygraph tests. It destroyed his life, while Wardrip quietly walked free. September 20th, back in Wichita Falls, Wardrip struck again. This time, 21-year-old Ellen Blah was targeted as she walked to her car after her evening shift as a waitress. He abducted her and drove her to a remote location and strangled her to death. He left her body to rot in a field, abandoned her blood-stained car in town, and disappeared into the crowd like he had done so many times before. It took 3 weeks before her decomposed remains were found, and by then, she could only be identified through dental records. The last known victim before his first arrest came on May 6th of '86. It was 21-year-old Tina Kimbrough, a waitress he'd recently befriended. Wardrip showed up at her apartment uninvited, and there he smothered her with a pillow, claiming she reminded him of his ex-wife.
When the rage and all the violence was occurring, I saw her eyes, I saw her face, I screamed how much I hated her.
Witnesses saw a man matching his description leaving the apartment complex. A few days later, Wardrip, racked by a mix of guilt and desperation, called police from a payphone in Galveston, threatening to unalive himself. When they arrived, he then confessed. But the confession only scratched the surface. And sentenced to 35 years in prison for Tina's murder, Wardrip served less than a third of it. By 1997, he was out on parole, walking free, wearing only an ankle monitor to restrict his movements. He remarried, found God, and became a model citizen in tiny Olney, Texas. It wasn't until 1999 that Detective John Little, reviewing the cold cases of Sims, Gibbs, and Blah, made a chilling discovery. DNA from two of the old crime scenes matched each other, and when Little dug deeper, a pattern emerged. Wardrip wasn't just a one-off killer, he had ties to all three women. But the big man had never submitted DNA after his early conviction. Back then, there was no mandatory offender database, so Little got creative. During a casual encounter, he asked Wardrip for a coffee cup he was drinking from, claiming he needed it to spit tobacco. Wardrip handed it over, none the wiser, and then tests confirmed it. Wardrip was the man who had terrorized North Texas years earlier. Under questioning, he cracked and confessed to it all. Each murder had been meticulously planned, yet spontaneous. He had stalked the women he could overpower, and today, at 66 years old, Wardrip sits on death row. Number 3. Hunted at home. They say your home is your sanctuary, a place to feel safe, invisible to danger. But for 23-year-old Molly McLaren, a wall she trusted to shield her couldn't keep the monster out, because the truth was, he was already inside. And Molly was bright, vibrant, and determined to carve out a good life for herself. A university student at Kent in England, she was studying exercise and health, a field that perfectly matched her passion for fitness and wellness.
Get to the same bit every day. I feel like I'm lagging. Everyone gets that bit. Just got to push through. It is not pretty.
She shared healthy recipes online, posted workout routines, and was slowly building a life that seemed full of possibilities. But behind every cheerful post, and behind every smiling photo, Joshua Stimson was there, clicking refresh. And they'd officially met in the fall of 2016 on Tinder. At first, it was casual and flirty, and Stimson played the role of the perfect match, attentive, supportive, and charming. But it didn't take long for the mask to slip. By the start of 2017, Molly saw the red flags for what they were: his possessiveness, his jealousy, his need to control where she was and who she was with. She tried to leave him, but breaking free would prove harder than she ever imagined. Stimson began following her everywhere, popping up unexpectedly at the same stores and gyms she visited, pretending it was just a coincidence. At least once, neighbors noticed Stimson lurking in the shadows near her flat in Chatham, standing there for hours without knocking or making his presence known, just waiting. Molly's friends urged her to be careful. She blocked him on social media, changed her routines, and even told her parents she was afraid. But the law offered little protection in a case like this. Nothing threatening had been done, so what really can you do? And Stimson knew all this and took full advantage. On the morning of June 27th of 2017, Molly went to her gym as usual, a place that had always been her escape. Stimson was already there, waiting for her right there in the parking lot. He watched as she worked out, then waited for her to leave. Surveillance footage later showed him trailing Molly through the parking lot, carrying a kitchen knife and a pickaxe he'd hidden inside a sports bag. Molly got into her car, but before she could lock the doors, Stimson struck with terrifying speed, ripping open the door and stabbing her more than 75 times in a matter of minutes, right then and there in the Dockside Shopping Center. Eyewitnesses tried desperately to intervene, banging on the windows, screaming at him to stop, but he was locked in a frenzy. The brutality of the attack was so severe that the knife snapped in half. When police arrived, Stimson was standing just a few feet away, his clothes soaked in Molly's blood. He made no attempt to flee, and he was satisfied with what he had done. In that trial, his defense team tried to argue diminished responsibility, claiming mental illness drove his actions. But the jury saw it for what it was: calculated, obsessive murder. Joshua was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 26 years. No sentence could erase what Molly's family endured: the knowledge that their daughter hadn't been taken in some random act of violence, but she was hunted, tracked, and murdered by a man who turned her home, her gym, her entire world into a prison long before he ever drew a knife. Number 2. The Lurker. At just 15 years old, James Fairweather wasn't just fantasizing about murder, he was studying it. He had carved out a terrifying double life by this time: a bullied schoolboy by day, a remorseless predator by night. And when he finally struck, his attacks were as savage as they were senseless. The quiet town of Colchester, Essex, had no idea a teenage killer was stalking its parks and footpaths, hiding and crouching low among the trees, latex gloves and knife ready, waiting for the right moment to turn his fantasies into bloody reality. Fairweather's first victim was 33-year-old James Atfield. On March 29th of 2014, Atfield was found brutally mutilated along the Riverside Path in Castle Park. And his body bore more than 100 stab wounds. And so vicious, investigators initially thought multiple attackers had to have been involved. Back at home, tucked away in his bedroom, James could now start to join the ranks of those he idolized. He had a grim collection of articles and clippings on history's most infamous murderers: Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, Steve Wright, the Ipswich Strangler, and Ted Bundy. Fairweather could barely wait for the news to be printed on what he had done so that he could add it to his scrapbook. But he wasn't done and wanted more, so 3 months after Atfield's murder, Fairweather struck again. This time his victim was Nahid Almania, a 31-year-old PhD student at the University of Essex. And dressed modestly in her traditional clothing, Nahid had been walking the Salary Brook Trail on her way to campus. And Fairweather, once again lying in wait, ambushed her from the underbrush. And he stabbed Nahid multiple times, leaving her to bleed out along the footpath. As Nahid's family grieved across continents, struggling to comprehend how their brilliant, kind-hearted daughter could be stolen away in a foreign country, the Colchester streets grew quieter and fear crept in. The police, under enormous pressure, questioned over 70 individuals with known histories of knife crimes, including Fairweather himself. He almost got away with it too. Despite being flagged for a previous knife-point robbery at a local shop, Fairweather was dismissed after a routine interview. His history earned him only a youth supervision order, not intensive monitoring. Authorities would later claim that no warning signs had been strong enough at the time to predict the horror that was coming, but Fairweather couldn't stop. In May 2015, over a year after his first murder, he returned to the Salary Brook Trail, knife in hand, and latex gloves pulled tightly over his fingers. He was waiting for his third victim when police officers patrolling the area by chance spotted a suspicious figure ducking behind the greenery, and they moved in. And James Fairweather was finally caught and basically red-handed. He immediately confessed to killing both Atfield and Alameda, but tried to argue he wasn't responsible. His defense in court claimed that Fairweather was suffering from psychosis, that he heard voices telling him to kill.
Some of the voices were talking to me. You need to make a sacrifice, or we're going to come and get you. You need to do it. And I saw him. It was laying on the grass. So like that. It was like that. Just fast asleep, where he was drunk. And he goes, he's the one.
But psychiatric evaluations cast doubt on those claims. One expert testified that the boy showed no signs of psychosis, only a cold, calculated lust for violence. Throughout the trial, Fairweather remained largely expressionless, even as families of the victims wept in the gallery. He forced them to endure every agonizing detail of the attacks, instead of admitting guilt outright. On April 22nd of 2016, the jury returned a unanimous verdict, guilty on 2 counts of murder. The judge warned Fairweather he faced a very long prison sentence, and though the law capped the starting point for sentencing juveniles at 12 years, the brutality of his crimes demanded far more, and as a result he received 27 years. So what do you think? Is that enough time for a proper punishment? Number 1. Lemu Smith's Reign of Terror. Born in 1941 in Amsterdam, New York, Lemu Smith grew up under the heavy hand of religious extremism. And to outsiders, he was just a normal kid from a working-class town, but Smith later claimed that by age 11, the monster inside him had already surfaced. He confessed to nearly smothering a neighborhood girl around that time, a crime never officially confirmed, but when viewed in hindsight, seems pretty plausible. By the age of 16, blood had already been spilled near his neighborhood. Dorothy Water Street was found robbed and beaten to death. And evidence pointed directly at Smith, but thanks to a botched interrogation, Smith walked free, a decision that would haunt New York State for decades. After that, he moved to Baltimore, trying to escape scrutiny, but instead of keeping a low profile, he turned things up a notch. And just 6 months after Dorothy, in broad daylight, he abducted a 25-year-old woman and beat her savagely and left her for dead. And this time, witnesses intervened, and Smith was arrested, sentenced to 20 years, and everyone could breathe a sigh of relief. Except that this didn't keep him locked away for long. After just a decade behind bars, Smith was back on the streets in 1968 and ready to strike again. In May of '69, he kidnapped and assaulted 2 women in a single day, including a family friend he had known for years. Again, he was caught, then imprisoned. Again, the system believed he could be rehabilitated. So, in 1976, Smith was paroled. And this time, though, the consequences would be catastrophic. And the day before Thanksgiving of 1976 in Albany, 2 people, Robert Hederman and his secretary, Margaret Byron, were found brutally slain inside Hederman's religious bookstore. The scene was grotesque. Blood splattered, bodies mangled, and a disturbing clue left behind: human feces smeared across the store. Now, Smith was working nearby at the time, so he had easy access, and as investigators would later confirm, hair and blood traces matched. But while police took time to build up their case, Smith continued his campaign of terror. In December of '76, Joan Richburg, just 24 years old, was attacked in her car at the Colony Center Mall. She fought desperately, but it didn't matter. Smith assaulted, mutilated, and murdered her, and then vanished again into the crowds of holiday shoppers. Weeks later, he struck again inside a gift shop. This time he tried to lure a young woman away, and when that failed, he grabbed her 60-year-old grandmother instead. It took multiple bystanders to finally stop him, but he was able to get away, but not before breaking the woman's hand and knocking her unconscious. By mid-1977, investigators across upstate New York were connecting dots, and too late to save the next victim, though. On July 22nd, Marley Wilson was found dead by the train tracks in Schenectady, and she had been strangled, mutilated beyond recognition, and her body discarded like trash. Witnesses placed Smith nearby, again. It was only after Smith abducted another woman, Marianne Maggio, that he was finally caught, after forcing her to drive toward Albany, where police intercepted the car in a traffic stop. This time, they finally had him. When forensic investigators revisited old cases, they discovered something. The wounds on Marley Wilson's body matched a bite pattern, Smith's bite. In a desperate bid to avoid a life sentence, Smith confessed to 5 murders, including the cold case of Dorothy Waterstreet, the girl murdered 2 decades before. He blamed it on multiple personalities, then on the spirit of his dead brother who possessed him. He blamed it on anything he could, really, except himself. A sentence to life, this is where most psycho stories fade off, but not Smith's. That predator inside him was alive and well, and in 1981 he found his next victim, corrections officer Donna Payan. On May 15th, Smith lured Payan into an isolated area of Green Haven Correctional Facility. And after that, nobody could find her. For hours, officers frantically searched the prison's grounds, baffled that a fellow officer could simply vanish. It wasn't until garbage from the facility was hauled to a landfill 20 miles away that the horrifying truth surfaced. When Donna's mutilated body was discovered stuffed into one of the bags. This was the first time in American history that a female corrections officer had been murdered inside a maximum security prison. Smith, chillingly, almost got away with it too, if not for one detail: the bite marks. The same forensic examiner who tied Smith to Wilson recognized the telltale imprint on Donna's body. Today, at the age of 83, Smith remains on death row at Wen Correctional Facility.
Do you deserve to die?
Do I deserve to die? Not according to my standards. Others feel different.
How does it feel knowing you're now condemned to die and you're forced to look death in the face?
I've looked death in the face ever since I was born black.
So there were 5 very disturbing murder cases. That's going to wrap up today's episode. If you enjoyed it and you want more, check out another video or podcast. We have tons of content to scratch that true crime itch for you. Thanks for tuning in. Stay safe out there. I'll see you over in the next one.